Audio on demand from Vision Christian Media.
Foundations.
Okay, so the Holocaust, as you know, devastated those communities, and Jews who survived eventually made their way to Israel. These Jews are known as Sephardi Jews. However, when Jews fled one nation or region for another, there was a whole lot of crossover.
Foundations. Understanding the Jewish foundations of our Christian faith. With Robbo Robinson and Mandy Warby.
In the 1800s, Jews throughout the diaspora began migrating back to their ancient homeland of Israel, at the time known as the region of Palestine. It had been previously occupied by many different empires from the time of Babylonian conquest. Before World War I, it was occupied by the Ottoman Turks. After their defeat in the war, it was occupied and governed under the British Mandate, and Israel was reborn in May 1948. The land went from being a region of a governing empire to a sovereign nation-state. However, that sparked Israel's first war, the War of Independence, and Jews from around the world became refugees overnight and fled to their ancient homeland. Who were they, and where did they come from?
You've just covered a very large time span there. Yeah, Israel has had, and the Jewish people have had, a phenomenally turbulent history. When they first declared themselves to be a nation on May 14, 1948, immediately 5 Arab armies declared war, and it was on all sides too. It was Lebanon and Syria who attacked from the north, Iraq and Transjordan, which later became Jordan. They attacked from the east, and Egypt from the south, and they were assisted by fighters from the nation of Sudan. I believe there might have even been contingents from Saudi Arabia as well. But not only that, the Arabs internally and volunteers from other Muslim nations, they also participated in the attempt to destroy the newborn Jewish state, and they failed. And while Israel did suffer heavy losses, she came out of that victorious.
It was quite amazing. I mean, it was truly miraculous, wasn't it, that they would survive that? Because, I mean, you would think with all those nations bearing down on them, they would have just been wiped out.
Well, think of it. When did Second World War end?
Well, it ended 1945.
This is only 1948. So we're only talking a couple of years after the Holocaust.
Yeah.
And most of these Jews who were in Israel were Holocaust survivors.
Yeah.
And they took on 5 Arab armies plus their cohorts.
Amazing.
It was truly miraculous.
Yeah.
I mean, truly. But one of the consequences of this particular war and the rebirth of the State of Israel, and you mentioned this actually, was that there were about 1 million Jewish refugees from many nations of the world. Actually, there's something that was a lot higher than that. But from nations who expelled them, or from Jewish populations that fled knowing that they were going to be murdered if they'd stayed in the nations of the diaspora where they were.
So where did they come from then?
Well, there were basically 3 ethnic groups within Israel, known as the Mizrahi Jews, the Ashkenazi Jews, and the Sephardic Jews. That's the 3 basic designations.
All right, well, let's work through those 3 and figure out where they have come from to find themselves in Israel.
Okay, well, the first group we'll look at is the Mizrahi Jews, who came to Israel from Arab and Muslim lands, including nations in North Africa, parts of the Caucasus. Now, the Caucasus is the area between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. And those are the nations of Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia, parts of southern Russia, Dagestan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, most of the stans, Bukhara. Mizrahi Jews are believed to date right back to the exile of Babylon and Persia. So we're talking about modern-day Iraq, Iran, Yemen, Egypt, Pakistan, and maybe even India.
Wow.
It's really a mixed bag of ethnicities, and it's believed there could have been between 6 and 7 million Mizrahi Jewish refugees who fled to Israel when the State of Israel was reborn.
Wow.
The basic number that everybody goes with is 1 million Jews were refugees, but it was probably a lot more than that.
Yeah, well, that's a lot more, isn't it?
Yeah.
So what about the Sephardic Jews then?
Okay, well, the Sephardi Jews primarily fled the Iberian Peninsula, the nations that we know of as Spain and Portugal. Now, when they were expelled in the 15th century, they moved south into North Africa to nations that we know of as Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, and Egypt. Okay, so you're talking about when King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, they expelled all the Jews.
Right, yes.
Right, so back in the 15th century. So they migrated down, but they still originate from Spain and Portugal. Now, because they kind of mix and there's some crossover, which made it very, very confusing for me as I'm thinking, hang on a second, didn't they mention Egypt in the last group? Not only is North Africa nations mentioned, but also there was relocated to southeastern and southern European nations such as France, Italy, Greece, Bulgaria, Northern Macedonia, and Turkey.
Wow.
So
okay.
they seem like a long, long way away
That's
from
right,
Northern
they do.
Africa,
Yeah.
or even Spain and Portugal. But because of the migration to those places originating Spain and Portugal, these guys are Sephardic Jews.
Okay. All right, so what about the Ashkenazi then? Whereabouts do they come from?
Okay then, the Ashkenazi Jews were part of the Holy Roman Empire. Now this is not talking about the Roman Catholic Church or any regions there. The Holy Roman Empire was a multi-ethnic complex of territories in Western and Central Europe that developed in the early Middle Ages, and dissolved during the wars with Napoleon. Now, religious persecution caused them to move eastward to establish new communities in the nations that we today know as Belarus, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Moldova, Poland, Russia, Slovakia, and Ukraine. All right, but they started. We might almost look at the Holy Roman Empire as being around Germany. That region, okay? So again, nothing
Central
to do...
Europe, you'd say then?
Yes, nothing to do with Roman Catholicism at all. Okay, so the Holocaust, as you know, devastated those communities, and Jews who survived eventually made their way to Israel. These Jews are known as Sephardi Jews. However, when Jews fled one nation or region for another, there was, of course, as we said, a whole lot of crossover. Yeah. So, for example, not every Spanish Jew made their way to Morocco. Some of them made their way to America. A large Jewish community ended up there. Some Jews who fled Egypt made their way to England. So because there are so many crossovers within these ethnic migrations, many Ashkenazi Jews use the title Mizrahi Jews and vice versa. Because I hadn't heard of Mizrahi Jews until I started this study.
In some respects, they're one and the same.
Exactly.
But if you go back far enough, they say, oh, no, we're actually from Spain.
So confusing, Robbo.
So give us a breakdown then. I mean, you know I love my stats. So of the three different ethnic groups, how many have made up within Israel? Okay, so
currently the Mizrahi community is the largest of these three groups. As of July 2020, about 45% of Israel's Jewish population identify as either Mizrahi or Sephardic, basically the same thing. Okay, about 44% identify as Ashkenazi. And these are ethnic lines passed through the paternal line. So tracking these lines can be really difficult because there's these blurred lines of which nations and ethnicities belong to which category because they've crossed over. Basically, they're running for their lives.
Yeah, that's right.
So they started in one place and they just went anywhere they could. And so you think, oh, well, they're from Morocco. No, they're not actually. They're from Spain.
Yeah.
They ended up
They passed through Morocco at some point.
Went to Morocco and then started to develop cultures and traditions there. Yeah. And they passed them on and
That's amazing.
It can be very hard.
So, I mean, obviously, we've identified that these different terms, Ashkenazi, Sephardi and Mizrahi, they're not religious designations or alliances, are they? They're really the ethnic alliances based on their migration pattern and how they've come to be part of the diaspora.
You're absolutely right, and you're absolutely not right. And that is because many of these groups are religious from those particular areas. So you're absolutely right. These are we're talking about these geographical locations where they've come from and where they've migrated from and how they ended up in Israel. That's absolutely true. But each of these groups also have their own traditions from these ethnic cultures and their religious traditions. They move to other areas and they develop new traditions within their cultures. And then they move from there to another one. They develop some more and they align themselves with a different rabbi or rebbe. And then you have some breakaways. And then by the time they all get to Israel...
Well, we talk about a melting pot, but that's literally what that would look like, wouldn't it? Because you would have then like Ashkenazi Reformed, Ashkenazi Reconstructionist, like, you know, where do you fit?
Oh, look, you know what? When you look at Israel as a nation, there are so many things that would tell you this nation should fail on every level. Just take into consideration that for 2,000 years they were in the diaspora in all the countries of the world with all their traditions, their foods, their customs, everything. Then you have a catastrophe and they all flee, the ones that survive and aren't murdered. They all flee to all these different parts of the world and eventually they end up in the state of Israel altogether. So you're talking about multi-ethnic, multinational, multicultural, multi-food, multi-different looking skin, shapes. You know, we're talking every nation of the world. Different, multilingual, the number of languages. that are spoken there, all their customs and traditions, plus the diversity of their religious beliefs and spectrums. And they all come to Israel. For example, you've got, French Jews, German Jews, highly educated Jews. And then you've got the Ethiopian Jews that came that had never seen a toilet.
Wow.
Didn't know what a bottle of water was, had no idea what electricity was.
Wow.
Mingling with this new booming modern nation. For all intents and purposes, Robbo, Israel should have failed within its first 12 months. What's more, they all came out of the Holocaust. They were a broken, devastated people.
Yeah, that's right.
And yet today they lead the world in so many things. Israel is miraculous.
Well, that brings today's program to a close, but a reminder that you can listen back to today's episode and others that you might have missed via the free Vision app. If you don't already have it on your device, just search Vision Christian Media on your app store to download it. You can also listen again on our website. Just go to vision.org.au/foundations. We invite you to join us again next time. And if there's a topic that you'd like us to discuss on a future program, I encourage you to get in touch with us via the website vision.org.au/foundations.
This has been Foundations, a look at the Jewish foundations of our Christian faith. For study notes, resources and more, see vision.org.au/foundations.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.